Welcome back. Recently, we've been hearing more about a shocking newer fraud. Homeowners return after a time away only to find that their house has been fraudulently sold from under them. How does this happen?
We've seen a very strong increase during COVID-19 of what we call mortgage fraud, Libby. And this is where someone impersonates a homeowner, gets a mortgage on a home, and receives the proceeds from that mortgage without the homeowner knowing. And it became somewhat of an epidemic during COVID-19 because lawyers were no longer meeting with the clients. It was being done virtually. So signings for these mortgage documents, everything was done virtually. So it was easy for the fraudster to set that up. And then in late 2022, we started to see a bit of an increased attack from putting mortgages on individuals' properties to what we call total title transfers, where they were actually posing as the homeowners and selling the houses and taking the proceeds so that the homeowners would often be away and find out later that their house has been sold out from underneath them.
Okay, so they have to pose as somebody that they're not. Isn't it up to a realtor or the lawyer? I mean, who is responsible for making sure that you've got the right people? Isn't someone else liable here?
Liable, I can't speak to, but there's certain red flags that they should be aware of. But I mean, it comes down again to identity theft, and that's really the trunk that all these frauds that's created here. And with the identity theft, you get fake identification with the person's face on it. It looks like an Ontario driver's license, social insurance cards, any type of identification, and they can walk into a bank or they can walk into a realtor. And there's only so much somebody can do with what's provided them.
The identification looks authentic because these are professionals. These aren't, these aren't just all of a sudden I decide tomorrow I'm going to sell someone else's house or put a mortgage on it. These are people, they're very organized, fairly sophisticated. There's about 4 or 5 groups working in the GTA that are doing this. And they hire stand-ins. So the people that are actually appearing on the ID and showing up are not necessarily the ones that are ultimately getting the bulk of the funds from this fraudulent activity. They're paid stand-ins. They get paid like $10,000.
And they would be the accessories to the crime or the crime?
Well, they would be just as guilty as the person that receives the bulk of the money because they're part of the fraud.
Is there anything that makes somebody more at risk for this? I mean, for instance, if you have a common name.
Absolutely. It's the amount of information that we're sharing in publicly available sources. And so in many cases, someone who goes away, for example, maybe a snowbird for the year, they're basically sharing their vacation time in real time, posting pictures from the beach. I'm at the airport, I'm leaving. Everyone knows that they're away. They're sharing photos that can then be scaffed off of this publicly available feed and used to create that perfectly good-looking government-issued identification. They're sharing details about their lives that can then be put into a dossier and used by the fraud artists to go to a bank, go to a financial institution, and essentially pretend to be them. So a lot of the fuel for these kinds of scams comes from our public profiles because many of us are oversharing in these forums and we're giving them the opportunity to use that information against us. And so they make it even harder for a bank employee, for example, to tell the difference because it looks just like us because it is us.
When you say who's more vulnerable, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's appropriate that we're on a show called theZoomer because Zoomers can be the most vulnerable because what the fraudsters are looking for is often a house that has a high equity value. So that's typically people in later life that have either paid off their mortgage or have a very small line of credit compared to the equity. So in the GTA, let's say your house is worth $2 million and you have no mortgage or a little mortgage, that's the property they're looking for because the return can be higher.
One of the easiest ways to prevent a lot of this is if financial institutions, who's ever granting these mortgages, would actually be required to verify the authenticity of these identifications. So a lot of driver's licenses that are used don't have a legitimate license number. It'd be simple as a Ministry of Transport check to see if the license was actually a real license. Most of the ones we see, the government identification, our fraudulent identification, the numbers aren't real, the people aren't real, they're registered to post office boxes. It wouldn't take much to verify.
And the banks won't do it.
They don't.
The banks are governed by federal regulation. So whatever the federal government has put into the laws is what they do. Generally not much more.
Does title insurance protect you or not?
Yes, the problem is that title insurance became vogue in Canada because it's a move up from the U.S. In probably about the mid-2000s, maybe even a little earlier than that. If we purchased our houses in the 80s or 90s, title insurance wasn't around. So I always recommend to people that have owned their home for a lengthy period of time, go to their real estate lawyer or a real estate lawyer, have them check to see whether or not they have title insurance. It's a one-time payment, okay, and it's fairly inexpensive for your most important asset, because title insurer will work with you and be your advocate to get everything reversed after. If you don't have it, you're on your own, and it can take years to get cleaned up, and as much as $50,000.
Approximately how much does the insurance cost?
Anywhere from $400 to $800, but it's one time. It's not like car insurance where you're paying for it every year. It's a one-time fee.
We'll be back with more of the Zoomer.